So what I've found is that if you practice semen retention in this specific cycle, rather than trying to go years and years and years, you're actually going to get much better results. Higher testosterone, better libido, better erections, more energy, more focus, more creativity, and overall, you're going to feel much more balanced in your life. 15 years ago, I made a very poor decision. This was 2010. I was 21 years old. I was in a chiropractor's office and there was this book in the waiting room. The book was called something about living on the raw vegan diet, living on the raw diet. I ended up getting this book, taking it home and reading it because at this time I was early on in my path of learning about nutrition and healthy lifestyle, spirituality, all these different things. I was just starting to learn. So I was really taking in as much information as I could. And so I'm reading this book and it's talking about how cooked food is extremely toxic to the human body, especially meat, all these things. And so basically the only way to be healthy and to be able to feel spiritual is to eat nothing but raw foods, basically fruits and vegetables and maybe some nuts. And I was convinced. I was like, oh shit, that's what I've been doing wrong. That's why I have challenges and I'm not super, spiritual and my third eye isn't open. That's because I'm eating cooked food. Oh, simple solution. So immediately, I started eating nothing but raw fruits and vegetables pretty much. I do this for about 2 months. And you have to realize at this time, before starting this diet, I'm about 6'1". I'm a tall guy. And I weighed 135 pounds. I was a beanpole. I was skin and bones. I was very, very skinny. And by the end of this 2 months that I did this raw vegan diet, I lost 10 pounds. I weighed 125 pounds. I looked emaciated. I looked like a walking skeleton. I've seen pictures of myself in this time period. And I'm like, how the hell did I think that this was a good idea? I was wasting away. I truly believe, when I was on this raw vegan diet, I truly believed that I felt super healthy and radiant and that, yes, everything was great. This is the best diet ever. I feel so good. But reflecting back on it now, I was very weak. Very weak. And once I came to my senses and started eating real food again, I was like, oh my God, I feel so much better. I can actually lift heavy objects and not feel like I'm about to pass out. And I was like, how did I do this? How did I do this for so long? I mean, some people do these types of things for years. And what I realized, reflecting on this, and telling you this for a reason, this is all gonna come together, is basically, this taught me that we can have this fixed concept or idea that we've been convinced of through theoretical information and believe in it so strongly that it overrides our direct experiential information, our experience, essentially, to what basically we become disconnected from reality when we're living in a conceptual idea because we're so convinced of it. And this is a good preface to what I'm going to talk about because I see a lot of parallels in men who are practicing semen retention, and I've experienced this myself. And I just want to ask you, have you had a similar experience in your life where you were so fixated on a certain belief, so convinced about it, that even though your reality was in dissonance to that belief, the experience wasn't lining up with the belief, you still believed in it? I'm just curious, or just reflecting on that. And I'm guessing a lot of you have, but some of you may still be stuck in those patterns, and it's okay, it's okay. I've been there myself. I'm Jonathan White. I'm here to help you master your sexual energy so you can manifest your ideal life. So when I first got into semen retention, 11 years ago, not too long after that, I remember reading the book written by Montauk Chia and Michael Wynn, which is right here, Taoist Secrets of Love, Cultivating Male Sexual Energy, the classic. It's a great book, it's fantastic. But the whole first several sections of the book are basically painting this picture of if you ever ejaculate, you're fucked. You're gonna drop over dead, your whole life's wasted, never ejaculate. It kind of has that sort of vibe to it. And my belief system was okay, ejaculation's completely wrong, it's completely terrible. If I ever do it, I've failed, essentially, so I need to never ejaculate again. And I had this belief for at least probably 2, maybe 3 years. So basically, I would go, I'd go a month. I'd go a month without ejaculating. I was doing my sexual kung fu practices. I'm doing my solo cultivation, baby. I'm drawing it through the orbit. I'm doing my daily qigong, my meditation. I'm transmuting the sexual energy. But inevitably, whenever I got to a certain point, usually it was about 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes it was longer than that. I would have a wet dream, no matter what I did. No matter what I did, always would have a wet dream around this time period. Sometimes I made it longer, but overall, that was it. And every time this happened, I felt like I failed. I was like, oh, I did something wrong. I fucked up. This is not how it's supposed to be, blah, 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 blah. Well, after literally years and years of this kind of brutal cycle of feeling great, being on week 4 and just feeling on top of the world, like, yeah, I'm never ejaculating again. And then whether I released in my sleep or it was the occasion where I was doing my solo cultivation and accidentally went over the edge, I would feel like a failure. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I've lost everything. And I'm starting from level 1 all over again. And it would take me about 2 weeks to feel like I was, confident, like, all right, I've got this energy again. And this pattern continued even into, my relationships with women. Like when I was in a relationship and having sex, as part of that first initial 3 years of practicing semen retention, where I was very obsessive and always feeling like a failure when I did eventually ejaculate. And so eventually, I think it was about 3 or 4 years in, I started to realize, there seems to be this pattern here. It's like no matter what I do, I have an ejaculation, usually in my sleep or maybe involuntarily, because my pelvic floor just gets really, really, really tense and my penis becomes very sensitive around that, 6 weeks in. So I was like, maybe I should just allow myself to ejaculate at that time. So I started to accept that usually around week 4 or 6, it would simply be time for me to ejaculate. So I would be doing my sexual kung fu, but I'd be having fantastic sex. Like, let's not beat around the bush here. I was having great sex. I'm making love for hours, which you can do if you take my free ejaculation control course, which is in the video description. I'm having amazing sex. Oh, I'm drawing the sexual energy, the orgasm, the pleasure through my body. It's feeling fantastic. I'm doing that for 4 or 6 weeks, and then when it's time, I accept that it's time. I would accept that it was time and be like, okay, I'm drawn, I'm feeling it, fantastic, fantastic. Okay, now it's time to let it go. And then I would ejaculate. And I realized that, I actually don't feel depleted. I feel pretty good. Like the next day or 2, I would already be like back into pretty high energy. I'm like, maybe cyclical semen retention is where it's at, because now there's not this like guilt and frustration. I accept that I'm going to ejaculate, and now I can kind of plan around this, and it becomes less of an up-down struggle and more of just like a cycle of like, yes, this is the time to build, and this is the time to release. And I just noticed that I had a lot less contraction in my mind. I was a lot less obsessive about it, and I started to just feel better overall. Like everything in my life just felt a little more fluid because there was this acceptance around it. And I want you to just reflect a little bit. If you're practicing semen retention, or maybe you're new to it, have you noticed similar obsessive patterns? Do you feel like a failure if you ejaculate? Do you feel like you're just like pushing through this thing and it actually feels like unsustainable in some ways because it's just like, shit, I can never really go as long as I think I'm supposed to? And I just want you to consider that maybe it's not about going as long as you possibly can. Maybe it's about simply regulating your ejaculation. And this is where I'm really at today. I started to find some other teachers of Taoist sexual practices who talk about this idea of there being this balance. Whereas obviously ejaculating too much is excessive, but going too long without ejaculating can be also equally detrimental. There's one man in particular, Dr. Newman Lin. Rest in peace. He was an amazing human being. Depth of information that he left behind in some ways. His whole sexual kung fu practice was, again, ejaculating at just the right frequency. For some men, he said it was once a week. For really young men, he recommended twice a week. And my own time frame is longer than that. But there was this other perspective. And this was a dude who was very, very healthy, very sexually vital into his 50s and 60s. And there was this other teacher I studied with, this kind of obscure but very powerful being, a very accomplished Nadon master, who's not a public figure, who is not who's not a public figure. You know, a lot of my greatest teachers have been people who aren't really in the public's eye. They're just kind of behind the scenes. This is a dude who had a lot of chi, a lot of energy. He was also a bodybuilder. Dude was jacked, super swole. And he recommended that men, when cultivating, ejaculate every 2 to 3 weeks. That was his recommendation. He said if you go longer than that, you actually start to experience a diminished testosterone levels, diminished energetic levels, and to ejaculate at that right time period, it actually has a sort of stimulating effect on your endocrine system and also puts a bit of strain on your dantian. So it forces your body to recuperate quicker, kind of like maybe a similar concept to bodybuilding where you exert some force, you tear down the muscles a little bit, but then they get rebuilt stronger. But if you're only working out every single day, not resting enough, it's going to be a problem. And if you never work out, you'll never have that strain and pressure to stimulate your body to rebuild itself. So it was a new concept to me. And so I started to see how there's all these different perspectives. There's this whole spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum is the mainstream Western medical advice. Oh, you should ejaculate as much as you want. The more you do, the better. The healthier your prostate will be. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where ejaculating is completely wrong. Maybe it's even evil. There's a lot of religious ideas. Like you'll see this in a lot of the brahmacharya types of writings about essentially you have to go 10 years without ejaculating if you have any hopes of being a spiritual being. And which it's complete bullshit. It's just more like religious dogma. Essentially this idea that ejaculating is going to like deplete ejaculating at all will deplete your spirit and make you completely trapped in this horrible physical realm we live in. So there's these two extremes, and people tend to be in either one of them. We live in a world of extremes where people have a hard time forming their own kind of balanced viewpoints. You know what I mean? People like to just regurgitate other people's ideas without really, hey, maybe it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You know, that's become more my vibe is like, okay, let me feel into this. Does that feel true? Let me experiment with this. I'm a scientist in a certain sense. I'm an alchemist. I test things. I experiment with things because if they tell me, yo, you should never do this because blah, 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 it usually makes me want to try the thing to see if that's bullshit or not, because there is a lot of these like just ridiculous rules, whether it's in Qigong, meditation, spiritual practice, or whatever, that just are untrue. You know what I mean? So I've tested a lot of these things. And also, as I was looking at this, I started to realize like, I know men who were in their 60s and 70s who claimed to have not ejaculated for a decade. And are they immortal? Not exactly. I could tell that they have high estrogen in their body. And then some of my other teachers, again, who are proponents of cyclical ejaculation, like not going ridiculous time periods, but having a specific period in which you do occasionally ejaculate. And these dudes had higher testosterone levels. Like just from their physiology, you can tell when someone's testosterone or estrogen dominant. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, there's some cognitive dissonance here. And once again, in the name of science, I started experimenting. Like I remember there was one time, this was several years ago, I wanted to experiment with what would happen if I ejaculated once a week. And that was the most frequent, that was probably the most frequently I've ejaculated since I started retention. I was ejaculating for once a week for it was about 4 to 6 weeks. And I didn't feel a significant diminishing of my vitality and testosterone. Just a little bit. By the end of it, I could tell that it was a little bit too often for me, but overall, I felt okay. Like I felt fine. You know, no major depletion. And then there was another time period where I was like, okay, how long? I want to go as long as I can go. I'm going to go as long as I can go without ejaculating. And it was like 2 months in, and my pelvic floor just felt really stuck, really stagnant. And bear in mind, I'm very aware of my pelvic floor and how to, keep it balanced. I do a lot of pelvic floor release work, stretching, physical movement, tissue mobilization to help my pelvic floor stay balanced. I even stick a massager up my ass to like massage that area internally to keep things from being stuck, to release the muscle knots from within, so to speak. So I go all the way, guys. And regardless of all these things I was doing, there was just all this strong buildup of tension, and my penis was getting extremely sensitive, because I was still having sex regularly without ejaculating, and my erections were losing their, spring, and ejaculation control was becoming much more difficult. It just felt like things were very stuck in that area. And I was like, okay, this is how it feels. And then I had sex and allowed myself to ejaculate. And I actually felt better, like better after that. Both energy, mind, physically, I just felt better. I felt lighter, not depleted at all, but just like, okay, now I feel good. Like there was an excess that had been released. My erections were actually better. Like the next day I woke up with a fat erection. It was like, oh, I haven't seen you in a few weeks. Well, not exactly, but my erections hadn't been at quite that level of quality. So I'm like, okay, I ejaculate and then my erections get better and my libido was still high and my ejaculation control is better. Obviously this was balancing. What do you do with the information? What do you do? What do you do with the experience? So now where I'm at with this, from both my own research, which is very limited. There's simply not much scientific studies on semen retention. There's a few. There's a little bit of like the study where the men's testosterone peaked by 150% on day 7, but then it dropped back down to normal. There are some studies, proving that withholding from ejaculation can have some effects on testosterone, but there's not a whole lot to really show. So the only thing we really have to go on is theoretical information, what's been said, what's been written, which you always have to be careful of, you know what I mean? And then there's direct experience, which I think you can learn the most from. And my direct experience combined with research and information I was getting all averaged to cyclical retention being the best for my testosterone, for my erection quality, for my energy levels, for my physical, emotional sense of balance. I just feel the best overall when I ejaculate about once every 4 to 6 weeks. That is my sweet spot. Usually more so towards 4 weeks these days. And it took me a bit to discover that, but that's where I'm at. And that's actually my recommendation for a lot of men, is about once a month. If you're practicing sexual kung fu, if you're doing all these things, if you're transmuting the energy, keeping your pelvic floor balanced, if you are not, then it actually may be closer to 2 to 3 weeks. It depends. It depends where you're at. Again, this is something you have to discover for yourself, and it requires some sensitivity. It requires some experimentation. You have to be able to listen to your body. But again, I really feel that an occasional ejaculation clears out the pipes, so to speak. So it clears out some of the stagnance and the fluid buildup in the prostate region, which can cause a lot of tension and give you premature ejaculation, essentially. And it helps also to clear out a lot of psychic buildup. Ejaculation does have a function. I don't think ejaculation is evil, but if you overdo it, you're going to become depleted. And one of the functions of ejaculation, it's a release. It releases emotion, it releases tension. There's a huge buildup when you're practicing retention, and occasionally releasing it can be very balancing for you. And so most men actually abuse this because you do get that release and they're releasing every single day. They're using it to release their stress and kind of get off from it. And that's unhealthy because you deplete yourself. But I think that trying to go months and months and years and just completely forcing your way through it can be very mentally and emotionally and even physically unhealthy. So that's simply where I'm at with it. And again, you shouldn't take anything like just because I say it doesn't mean it's the truth. You know what I mean? Like, I'm human, we're all human. I don't think anyone's right 100% of the time, but I'm going on 11 years of direct experience with this, and I've learned a lot, I've experienced a lot. There's a lot of kind of these semen retention gurus who've brand new to this thing, and it's just like they're playing on the somewhat of a trend it's become, getting some attention, getting some views from it. It's rare to meet men who've really been doing this for a long time and have really integrated it into their cultivation practice and made it a sustainable lifestyle. So it's like, if you want this thing to be healthy and sustainable, then it's good to learn from someone who has more than, a year or even like 3 or 4 years of experience. Someone who's been there and done it for a while and seen a lot of the ups and the downs. And so I want you just to reflect on, what has your journey been with semen retention? How have you felt during it? Has it been very up and very down? Does it feel like this battle every single day with it? Does it feel unsustainable? Or is it something you don't even think about? Because for me, this isn't something I even think about. There's no question of like, oh, am I gonna get on Pornhub or jerk off today? There's not a chance of that happening. It's not even a thought in my mind. Because I developed the cycle, there's this regularity to it as well. It's good to have cycles with things where it's just like, you know when this thing's gonna happen. Instead of it being completely up in the air, it's like, well, I'm gonna go for as long as I can without ejaculating, then, oh shoot, I ejaculated. Well, I might as well jerk off like 20 times in a row, and then maybe I'll try this thing again. That's very unsustainable. You've just depleted all the energy you built up anyway, you know what I mean? Versus being strategic, being purposeful, being balanced with it. And your body just gets used to the process, and it feels fantastic. Like, I feel great when I'm 4 weeks in. I feel great when I ejaculate. I feel great the few days after ejaculating. Like, it's all good. It's all feels fantastic. And I have high energy. I have balance. I even have like solid erections and libido throughout all of it, throughout the whole cycle. So that's a sign of balance. So basically, the indicator of success with semen retention is, do you feel balanced physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? If you don't, something may be off. And also, there's a lot of factors to it. Semen retention is not a cure-all. You're not guaranteed incredible energy and testosterone and thousands of women just flocking to you simply because you practice retention. All retention is doing is stopping a leak of your gene. That's it. No, it doesn't give you superpowers, but what it can allow you to do if you've been, recklessly ejaculating is rebuilding your energy back to a normal level. And these so-called superpowers are simply what a normal human being should feel like. But we've just been so depleted. And there's also a lot of other things that are going to affect this. So I often get questions like, oh, I'm doing semen retention, but I still feel low libido or I don't have good erections. It's like, okay, bro, that's one little piece of the puzzle. Here's 100 other things, How's your mind? Do you just stare at a screen all day? Are you exercising? Are you stressed out? What's your diet like? Do you work out at the gym? Etc. There's a lot of pieces to sexual vitality. Your ejaculation frequency is simply one. But it is an important one to get under control. Please give this video a like, hit the subscribe button, and I highly recommend checking out my testicle breathing video. This is a guided practice to transmute your sexual energy. Have a great day, my friend. Wishing you the best on your journey.